So I'm Ken. I am the founder and CEO of Xverse. Xverse is a Bitcoin Web3 wallet and a platform for Bitcoin. Um, we started a few years ago as a Bitcoin wallet that supports layer twos. Um, we initially had support for Stacks, which is another Bitcoin layer two, since 2021. And this was way before even the current sort of crop of several dozen Bitcoin L2s that popped up over the last year once Bitcoin sort of the season two started. Uh, so in 2023, beginning of that year, Xverse became the first Bitcoin wallet to support Ordinals. And as you all know, Ordinals kicked off a whole new period in Bitcoin and basically brought back a lot of developers, users, and just overall a lot more hype on Bitcoin. And with that came, a new wave of Bitcoin L2s. Uh, we were growing a lot during that time period, and we kept up with all the updates on Bitcoin Layer 1, including Runes last year. And Xverse is now basically your Ordinals, Runes, and Bitcoin ecosystem wallet. And in the long term, Xverse is looking at Bitcoin L2s as a way to, scale Bitcoin and have all these, you know, applications that we see right now on layer one be used by millions more users. And we took an interest in Starknet as Starknet is also getting into Bitcoin L2s. So it was a great match, I would say.
Yeah, a couple questions. So I actually didn't know that you guys were before Ordinals. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess when you were before Ordinals, like a crazy question, what exactly were you doing? Was it just like a pure, like almost like I don't know if you remember like BRD wallet from back in the day before they got acquired for $1 billion?
So
Um, seems like a good thing to get into, actually.
so before Ordinals, we were primarily Bitcoin layer one and Stacks layer two,
Mhm.
uh, which does have some Web3 capabilities, and it's developed over time. But in the beginning, I think it was uh, you know quite limited in terms of being able to bridge your assets from Bitcoin layer one to layer two. And also during that time, I think Bitcoin and the crypto market in general was uh, in a bit of a bear market. And of course, if the layer one Bitcoin layer one is not getting a lot of activity, then the layer two is also not going to get a lot of activity. Um, and Ordinals is the thing that kind of kicked off more activity on layer one, actually.
Yeah, it's well, I guess before we even see like the kickoff in layer one, I think one of my like core theses about wallets are they're the center of any ecosystem. Because like at the end of the day, no matter what activity you're planning on doing, like that has to be initiated wallet side. So
Yeah.
even if it was like somewhat non-obvious, and even 2021, which wasn't that long ago, to be like sort of a Bitcoin L1 wallet, um, long term, I think you're still sort of in a position where over the next 5-10 years, like the capabilities and like even the like as Bitcoin changes, right, in terms of like its like increase in price or like a slower increase in price, as maybe it becomes more of like a transaction currency, like more and more things sort of like become available to you specifically because you're just at the center of that ecosystem. So for
Exactly.
us, I think that's one of the reasons that we were very keen on partnering with like an early, innovative like Bitcoin L1 wallet. Um, who, yeah. Um, Cool. And I guess a second question that I would have would be, when did Jan join you guys? Was he with you guys since the beginning? He's become one of the most kind of iconic members of the Ordinals and Runes community and the Bitcoin Season 2 community. Was he there since day one, or did he come with the Runes? And now I'm just asking you, like, I'm very interested though. Did he come with the Runes and the Ordinals, or was he there from the beginning?
So yeah, that's actually a pretty interesting story. He was with us pretty early on, before Ordinals, and one of the reasons that we got into Ordinals was actually, because of him. When Ordinals started, I think it was January 2023. It was like there were some users. There was like basically no wallet support, and we were also observing. We didn't jump in like immediately, and Jan, who was, more interested in Ordinals than myself at the time, and he was starting to play around with it. And one day he came to ask me like, "Hey, I want to inscribe an Ordinal. How do I do that? It looks like I have to download Bitcoin node, run it, and then inscribe." And he brought his laptop to me and was like, "Can you help me set up a Bitcoin node?" And at the time I was like, "Okay, sure, let's try and do it." But then the laptop didn't have enough storage to be like a Bitcoin node, and it was going to take him like several days to download the entire blockchain and then have it indexed and up and running. It was a really complicated process, and we just thought, hey, we're a Bitcoin wallet already, and it's not going to take us too much more effort to have basic support for Ordinals and let people inscribe. So why not let's spend a few days and just support Ordinals as an experiment. And then we went and in the next 4 or 5 days over a weekend, build out that initial Ordinal support in Xverse and launched it. And here we are. And Jan, was
That's perfect. So I guess I'll sort of like parallel period of time. But I think it's also worthwhile to just touch on, what the heck is an ordinal, right? Like we all understand that. What is ordinal theory specifically? Like we all understand that there's only so much we can do on Bitcoin right now. Specifically the biggest sort of hindrance that we have is Bitcoin has a virtual machine, sort of like Ethereum, but it's called script. And the script is useful to do some things, like it can allow you to lock your Bitcoin for a number of blocks. So for example, I can't spend this Bitcoin for 1,000 blocks. You can do something simple like that. But when it becomes a little bit more, we were just talking about you. Hey, Jan.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey. But when we were literally just talking about you, so it was perfect timing.
Sorry, I was late because I thought it was a Twitter space and I was on the road and I'm like, I don't have a computer. Okay, I need to rush back to be at my computer. So sorry for being a little bit late.
It's okay. We were saying really mean things about you, so we
yeah, that's okay. That happens all the time. It's fine.
So we were talking about sort of the beginning of Ordinals theory and what exactly is Ordinals theory. So I guess I'll throw that one at you because you just hopped on and this is not the easiest one to answer without using.
Well, it's not the easiest one, but I think obviously technically maybe Ken is a better person to answer the technical side of things, how it actually works and how it's connected to individual satoshis and indexing and stuff like that. But to me, the simple answer is very, very easy actually. It's NFTs on Bitcoin, right? People have been doing NFTs for the longest time. We have had NFTs on Bitcoin early on with the counterparty, rare Pepes and stuff like that, but there wasn't really that much adoption. And now after this cycle of NFTs on Ethereum and Solana and other chains, we basically saw it coming to Bitcoin in a way that actually Ordinals makes NFTs really better, right? Because if you look at one of the major selling point towards even the Ethereum collectors and Solana collectors is that, those NFTs, those JPEGs are actually not on chain. You're just relying on some centralized entity to store your data and just encode the link to the data on the blockchain, right? And with Ordinals, what KC did is that no, we need to improve it. We need to make it better. And so basically every single Ordinal is data inscribed on chain. Nobody can really erase it. Nobody can, take it away. You pay one-time fee and it's there forever. So as long as Bitcoin exists and one or two nodes sync the data will just exist forever, right? And so that to me was a groundbreaking thing. And that made me really believe that hey, this thing can actually have legs and it's going to be interesting.
So one of the words that I really like to use in these situations is a bearer asset, right? When you look at a lot of Ethereum NFTs, ultimately they're just they're hyperlinks, right, to a server, maybe the AWS server and an Oregon or something, right? But in Bitcoin, these are actually physical bearer assets predominantly, and I think that's interesting for a number of reasons. For one, the reason that we all got into cryptocurrency is because of digital bearer assets and the ability to physically settle digital bearer assets over the internet. It was precisely to get away from the idea of having sort of like a paper receipt, which allowed you to have access or not access to something that, you know, hypothetically should be rightfully yours. So in my opinion, I'm totally with you. Like, I think that was sort of what got me interested in the first place as well. We need to go to something that I think is aligns with like the industry that we got into to begin with. And the industry that we got into was about the physical settlement of bearer assets over the internet. And ordinals are sort of like step 2 of that, you know, really actually doing that rather than just like replicating paper receipts. Ken, I guess, do you mind if we pass it over to you? I would make a special request that we use the Casey, everyone's looking through like hallucinogenic goggles. I really like that analogy. So if you could throw that in there, I'd appreciate it.
So what are we looking for? Like a more technical explanation of ordinals?
If you could start with an analogy and then maybe work your way down technically or something like that, if that works.
Sure. Let me try.
We have a pretty technical audience, like in general for StarkWare.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. So, you know, Bitcoin was created as, you know, to be fungible, right? So any Bitcoin or a Satoshi, the smallest unit in Bitcoin, is the exact same as another Satoshi. So they're completely interchangeable. You know, there's no way to identify which Satoshi is which in these transactions. What Ordinals does is it actually assigns a numbering system to every single Satoshi in existence and in the future that will come in the future. And basically now you are able to track individual Satoshis as they move from address to address on the Bitcoin blockchain. And that's the Ordinal system. The actual NFT that we're talking about is related to that, but it's not exactly the Ordinal system. The NFTs come in because there was an upgrade to Bitcoin, the Taproot upgrade. And with that, you can now write basically arbitrary amount of data. Well, not entirely arbitrary, but a large amount of data to Bitcoin transactions. And that gets all stored on chain and is there forever. So when you combine these ordinals with you know, this new way of storing data on the Bitcoin blockchain, you get these identifiers that you can send around that are attached to this data, right? So you can upload an image as data, and they will be tied to a single Satoshi. And when you send these Satoshis around from address to address, it carries with it the data. So that gives you the NFT like system on Bitcoin, essentially. Yeah.
Proof of provenance, better than anything you could ever get in the real world. You know, you have, and then also like again, the ability to settle over the internet. So cool to me. So yeah, I guess one other thing that I want to use my my analogy, but like to an extent, right? If whether it be runes or whether it be ordinals, essentially we've labeled a certain number of sats or a certain band of sats based off of a certain convention, and all of us who are putting on these glasses and say, okay, every sat within this range is going to be part of this specific grouping. We all have essentially our sidecar protocol consensus. We are all wearing exactly the same goggles. So when we all look at the Bitcoin blockchain, we all see exactly the same thing. And no matter what, for the rest of history, that UTXO will continue to be represented on Bitcoin forever. And we'll be able to tell the difference between, for example, a rune or one type of rune and another because we're all looking through that same exact sidecar protocol. Is that like a simple, hopefully no issues there, Ken? That work?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I guess with Ethereum, I think ERC20s happened first, right? And in maybe 2017, you had sort of like the white paper phase, which is sort of like if I'm being honest with you, I'm going to call it like a less a more scammy version of meme coins. Like meme coins are pretty egalitarian in a sense, right? Whereas in 2017, I think that there was a lot of extraction that was practiced and like actually like more bad faith than you see in the ecosystem by quite a lot today. In 2020, ERC20s really started to become, I call them like digital companies to an extent, right? Or equity in digital companies. And long term, those digital companies could potentially start to receive dividends. And we really started to get into a world where like true value was being created, and the tokens themselves didn't just represent some like, this isn't really worth anything, but it started to represent, a unique kind of like a unique kind of equity, different than anything I think the world has ever seen before. And now we're starting to see that sort of like, and then came NFTs, right? NFTs came after. With Ethereum or with Bitcoin, NFTs actually came first, right? So our inscriptions and our like physical bare asset images came before the assets layer to an extent. In this kind of sort of Bitcoin season 2 era, yes. But if we do, someone corrected me on this the other day and I had to remember it. But if we go, and you actually mentioned it as well, but if we do a little bit of a blast from the past, assets have existed on Bitcoin before via, as you put it, counterparty and most notably OmniLayer, which is actually where USDT or Tether was initially. Tether was from like the beginning. It was actually issued on Bitcoin, and it's since left Bitcoin. But at the beginning, Tether was on Bitcoin, and it was really the first. Omni was, I think, probably the first major meta protocol that we saw in Bitcoin. But now we're sort of seeing a generation 2, where there's a reemergence of interest into runes and ordinals. And to me, you're seeing some meme coins right now, and some actually pretty strong meme coin communities. But you're also seeing, I think, people who really want to produce value on the chain. And that stuff becomes a lot more possible as computation begins to come to Bitcoin, whether it be with soft forks or whether it be with BitVMs. Either way, like computation is coming to Bitcoin. We know that for a fact now. So people now have sort of the opportunity to both like creatively produce, financial platforms such as lending platforms on L2s, and even to an extent on L1s, but much more programmable ones on L2. Potentially stable coins, and all of these things could potentially be issued on Bitcoin, the most secure database in the entire world. So we're pretty excited about that. But I guess I would ask a pretty rudimentary question. Like, Ordinals were super successful, right? For the most part, like there was, tremendous volume. I think there's still some really, really strong communities out there. Runes haven't been so successful at this point. There actually remains, as far as I can tell, really, really strong and big communities. But people don't love them as much as I think they might have Ordinals, or they have a lot more frustrations toward them. So Jan, I don't know if you want to jump in, but could you explain sort of like what you think
I would say that I disagree with you, right?
Okay.
And I will maybe share my arguments, and obviously really depends what kind of lens you look at it, right? So yes, meme coins down bad across the board. The Solana meme coins, they're probably worth nothing right now. Everything is down to zero. There's no activity on Solana chain. Like pump.fun is down like 95% when it comes to activity. So I think across the board, meme coins as a category have been through like a lot of like ups, and now we're down. And obviously, again, I don't think the meme coin category is dead. I think it's going to come back, but maybe we're going to see another evolution of that, right? It's not going to be just like random bullshit meme coins. Maybe it's going to be something else, but who knows, right? So that's one thing. Second thing, runes as a protocol, have been extremely successful in terms of onboarding people to Bitcoin. And actually, I would even say to some extent, well, I cannot say more so than Ordinals, because Ordinals are the OG, and they really kind of started this trend overall, that we started to see people actually downloading Xverse and playing around and getting NFTs, and then getting into DeFi and using Liquidium and using all of these different things. But runes have been extremely successful. Like, I think for us, I don't have the exact numbers, but we onboarded hundreds of thousands of people just through runes, right? And so that's another kind of number or data point that I think you need to look at, and kind of like that adds to the argument that runes have been very, very successful. However, I will then say, and I think one of the reasons why maybe runes didn't take off as much as people hoped for is that the expectations for runes were overhyped. And I think they were unrealistic, right? Because if you remember, we started with BRC20 tokens. And BRC20 tokens kind of kicked off this idea of like the new generation of fungible tokens on Bitcoin. However, technically, they were very cumbersome, like very hard to use for developers, and also like figuring out for the user, like, I need to inscribe this transfer inscription, and then I need to send that inscription to another wallet, and that's how I transfer these things around. There is no swapping of these things. Like it has been more than, well, maybe 2 years now, and nobody has built a swap experience for BRC20 tokens. It's just because it's difficult to do. And so from a technical point of view, we knew that BRC20s are not great, And so we kind of like put that hope on Runes, that Runes are going to solve all of these things, both the technical side as well as the user side. Unfortunately, we only solve the technical side. So on a technical level, Runes are much more efficient in terms of UTXO recycling, in terms of that you don't have to have these transfer inscriptions, you don't have to have all of these things. However, on the user side, like how it actually looks, like if you go and buy a Rune, or at least at the beginning, we kind of like improved that since with Xverse, but at the very beginning, when people started trading Runes, it was basically exactly the same as BRC20 tokens, meaning you go to one of these marketplaces and you cannot just buy $20 worth of Rune. You just go and you need to buy a lot of like 100,000 or 50,000, and you need to like split those Runes and list them and do that. And so that was really something that
Can we pause on that one really quickly, because we got a bunch of Starknet users here and they're used to like really nice UX. So I want, like, I love Runes. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I even love the quirky UX, to be honest with you. But the way that Runes work is because every single UTXO on Bitcoin is essentially a check. You sign that check from one person to the other, right? With Runes, we essentially will write, okay, we have a check and it has X amount of Runes on it, and I'm going to go sign this to someone else. When someone is selling Runes, they'll write a check essentially, and they'll sign their name on it, and they'll put a little bit of a condition there, which says, if you pay me this amount of money, then you're going to get this check, right? But just like you can't split a check up in sort of like 5 different groups, and then send someone like half of the check and be like, oh, it's worth, half of what the check would be. They're going to be like, you cut the check in half, you moron. Like, I'm not going to give you $500. And like, it's ridiculous, right? It's sort of the same thing with Bitcoin. You have to instead, write 2 different checks from that check of $25. So this makes it a very challenging UX for Runes, because it's almost like OTC trading, or like trading on order book. You can't do like partial fills. So if Jan lists a $50,000 block of Dog Go to Moon, and it's I want to go buy $5,000 worth, too bad. I have to go pony up another $45,000. I can't just buy $5,000 of his order. So sorry, please continue.
No, that was like a very good breakdown, and that's exactly what happened at the beginning. I will talk about what's possible today, because we have been improving this experience since day one, and it has gotten better. And I think it's very smooth these days. However, to answer my question, or your question, like you were asking, like why Runes didn't take off, and like why Runes are not so successful, it is exactly because of this, right? Because the hype was there at the beginning. People were really excited for Runes. We solved some technical problems and made it more efficient. But on the user side, at the beginning, it was basically the same as BRC20s. And so people are kind of like, oh, yeah, like, it's kind of fun, but, it's not groundbreaking. We cannot really do AMMs. We cannot really have this like smooth trading experience that people are used to. And so that, combined with obviously the meme coin mania kind of like ending or like going somewhere else, like that basically didn't allow Runes to fully, I would say, fulfill the potential just yet. However, people love the idea of like, hey, these are fungible tokens on Bitcoin. We just have to improve that experience, the trading experience, and we can do it through layer 2s. We can do it through layer 1 solutions like the ones that we have integrated into Xverse, because people have started to do this semi-centralized liquidity pools where, you provide liquidity and you can actually go to Xverse and you can buy $50 worth of DOC if you want to. So we have like added those experiences after, but it took us time to get there, right? And so I think the fact that it has been like a relatively slower-ish development, and it takes months and months to advance, I think that's why Runes didn't really take off in a way they everybody hoped for. But again, like I'm not giving up on runes because I think it's the best fungible token standard that we have on Bitcoin right now. And it's very easy to work with for developers. You know, you can sync the runes indexer very quickly. I think Raf, the lead maintainer of this, he said that if you're starting from zero, you can literally within like 30 minutes or something like that, you can basically sync all of those transactions and basically the runes indexer, and you can start going. You know, you can start building applications, you can start doing different things. And so I think that's really bullish. Unless somebody comes up with something better, which can also happen, right? There are people trying to do different versions of runes and forks and this. And so we're going to see if something else will take off. But again, people love the idea of fungible tokens on Bitcoin. Runes are the number one standard, the best standard we have today. And we just have to keep on improving that experience. And I think we're going to see a massive run in these assets long term. Again, is it going to happen short term? I don't know. I cannot predict the price. But I think long term, people love having assets on Bitcoin.
Agree. Like we did disagree, I guess, to an extent, but I think for the most part, we see eye to eye here. So the first thing that you said was users, right? Like, and then a price. Like we agree, price hasn't worked out, obviously, and I think we agree on some
of course. Yeah,
UX
I have a lot of runes.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't feel very happy about those bags. So, okay. You know, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The bags are down.
I've never been so confident in bags, which are down. But the real impetus for I actually got the runes bags like as things started to go down anyway. So I guess that helped out a little bit. But for the most part, like, why are we doing this at StarkWare? I think the answer to that is like pretty much your first, or it's a combination of the two things that you mentioned, right? As you onboarded hundreds of thousands of people to runes and to Bitcoin DeFi for the first time through Xverse wallet. And that's pretty amazing. Like a lot of layer 2s don't have that many users to begin with. And the reason for that is maybe because they're like largely picking from pretty much the same group of people. They're picking from the same source of liquidity. Runes brought in, Bitcoin developers like Casey and like Raf, who had different mindsets and different sort of levels of seriousness, I think, that separate runes from the pack, I think, and long term will be extremely valuable because they have a serious mission, right? It's not just like meme coins, I think, are a means to the end to help create like a more fleshed out financial system on top of Bitcoin. So I really appreciate that seriousness. The ability to onboard users for the first time and also just like truly incredible. People essentially raised their hands. They said, hey, I have Bitcoin and I want to use it for the first time. So yeah, I totally agree. I think that stuff's really incredible. For those of us who are tuning in from the Xverse side, I think now would make make some sense to like introduce Starknet a little bit, and I'll do it kind of briefly because I think we should have some users from both.
Yeah, let's do it.
But Starknet is a Ethereum layer 2 traditionally. And we focus on things called Stark proofs. Stark proofs are scalable, transparent arguments of knowledge. Essentially, this allows a very weak computer to monitor a very, very strong computer. So if you think of like what a Bitcoin full node should be, a Bitcoin full node should, in essence, be an extremely weak computer, right? We want to keep it as weak as possible. There's a 4 million weight unit limit to each block, which is not very much computation. That's to like force the chain to grow at a reasonable pace and to really limit the amount of hardware requirements that the average user has to keep. Traditionally in Bitcoin's history, everything that we've done, we've had to re-execute naively. So if Jan makes a transaction to Ken, even though I'm running a full node and I have nothing to do with that transaction, I still have to re-execute it in order to check to make sure that it had absolute integrity. With the zero knowledge proof, a very weak computer like a Bitcoin full node can monitor the computation performed on a supercomputer. So you can essentially verify someone's computation with absolute trust and assurance of integrity without having to re-execute the entire thing itself, which to me is the best way to scale something like Bitcoin because we really, really want to maintain and stay core to our value system, which is simplicity on the layer 1 and like a really limited amount of potential hardware requirements. But we still want to maximize, what we can possibly get. And the ability to not re-execute every transaction and instead just to validate the integrity of the computation performed on a layer 2 and then, move Bitcoin around as a result of that really maximizes beyond, it's almost magic to an extent, like how much it maximizes our ability to, doing different things on Bitcoin without longer term, compromising sort of Bitcoin's core values. So Starknet, we have an extremely performant layer 2 with, rather than Bitcoin, which has 10-second blocks, right? Starknet will have, I believe, 2-second blocks. And we have AMMs, we have lending platforms. In generally, there's just a composability to the ecosystem, which you couldn't do natively on Bitcoin layer 1. And yeah, we're really, really excited about the runes and the Bitcoin ecosystem. We were the first team to present on scaling Bitcoin with zero-knowledge proofs at the Bitcoin San Jose conference in 2013 via our founder, Ali bin Sassoon. And since then, we've been scaling Ethereum, but a part of our heart has, I think, always been rested like firmly in the Bitcoin ecosystem. If you were around, Bitcoin, everyone, a lot of the management of the company was around well before Ethereum started. So like, we all go back to our first love at some point. And I think that's sort of what you're starting to see here at StarkWare. And yeah, we're really excited about this burgeoning partnership with Xverse. We've kicked it off with a couple things already. Jan or Ken, I don't know if you guys wanted to share a little bit about what we've already accomplished together, and then maybe a little bit about what we can expect to see in the future.
Yeah, so with the launch or the announcement a couple of days ago, we launched a basically swaps from Starknet to Bitcoin and Bitcoin back to Starknet. So I think that's a first step in integration. We eventually want to have full support of Starknet in Xverse. So everything you can do right now with the Starknet wallet, you will be able to do with Xverse. However, for us, it's the connection to Bitcoin is much more important. Hence, that's why we have the swaps working first. We want users to be able to move from Bitcoin layer 1 to Starknet as a layer 2 very easily. And maybe we can get into the details later, but we also want to have a bridge for layer 1 assets like runes to Starknet up and running with Xverse, so that the experience of moving runes to a layer 2 DEX would be seamless. Yeah.
Yes, very, very excited about that as well. And it's not just DEXs, I think, right? Like there is just like a full fleet of financial activity that can be performed with runes when it goes on to like a full virtual machine. And I think that includes things, not just the things that I think we think of off the top of our head, like, DEXs and lending platforms, but there's really like still a very, very big design surface in terms of programmable assets and what people are going to do with them. And particularly when you put the mindshare of Bitcoin on things, we'll likely continue to see, broad expansion, and then hopefully a bit of a Cambrian explosion of innovation. But yeah, we're very excited about Xverse. I know that we meant to leave a little bit of time for questions here. So as the questions start to stack up, I'll leave this as like a question priming time. So for those of you in the comment section, please leave some questions. Yeah, and then yeah. So I guess some other things that we wanted to discuss are like the subject of Bitcoin softworks. So there are a variety of different Bitcoin softworks on the table right now, but for the most part, it's clear that the community is starting to get its feet moving. Three of the most predominant ones that I think we're seeing are like Check Template Verify from Jeremy Rubin. Essentially, that allows you to have like predefined spending conditions for a larger group. So it's like very limited covenants, or it allows multiple people to share a UTXO, but it allows multiple people to share a UTXO under sort of like much more specific and predefined circumstances. So people can share one UTXO, but only under predefined circumstances. And additionally, there's something which is a bit more aggressive, which is something like OpCat. And OpCat is sort of like the Swiss Army knife of Bitcoin upgrades. It can be used to do essentially anything. So whether you want to have anyone own a covenant and sort of do it, it's like the most. It turns out concatenation Opcat is like the most basic building block of a virtual machine. So anything that you can possibly imagine that we might want to do with Bitcoin, I would say that you can do it when you have Opcat. And one way I think that I can sort of prove that is, because I think this is a statement, is we have a 4 million weight limit on Bitcoin right now, right? So you can technically, as Ken put it, you can make a transaction which is, any size now, right? Up to 4 million, but there's no way to link transactions between blocks. So we can't actually really, it would be very challenging to use Bitcoin's 50 opcodes to like verify something like a zero knowledge proof or do some kind of complex computation. But we probably could, but we have a hard stop with 4 million. When you have something like Opcat, all of a sudden that hard stop disappears and a lot of the, intermediate computations that you would do in between become a lot more efficient. So for example, rather than like smushing two things together and hashing their outcome or verifying a Merkle tree, taking up, a quarter of a block, right? It will only take up, one millionth of a block. So significantly more efficient. But where do you guys stand on things like Opcat, things like checksig from stack, things like CTV? And I guess more importantly, how do you guys plan on listening to your users to see what they want and helping them sort of demonstrate to people what their hopes and dreams are?
Yeah, from Xverse, we want to empower developers. We want to move Bitcoin forward, right? So we definitely support any of these opcodes getting into the next software for Bitcoin. Which one? I don't, it's not really up to us right now. We will put our support behind any of them. I think just being able to make steps forward is good enough, right? Because we haven't really seen like a major upgrade or even a relatively minor upgrade to Bitcoin for years, right? Taproot was like the latest or the most recent major one, and that enabled a whole new ecosystem like Ordinals. So as a wallet, there isn't really a lot that we can do on the technical side to help push this, but there are tons of builders and projects like Starknet and others that are building on top of these opcodes and throwing their weight behind or supporting these proposals, going through the process and eventually ending up in a soft fork. So whichever opcode gets included first, Xverse will do everything that we can on our side to support it.
Yeah, and actually, interestingly, when you said like listening to our users, I think there are two things that I can say on that. So we are already listening to our users quite heavily, and it's true that users want better trading, users want better L2s. They don't want to trust a multi-sig type of thing, for their assets and stuff. And so I think with one of these soft forks that you mentioned, or maybe any other, this could be actually a huge improvement, for the builders to be able to build solutions that users actually want, be it in regards to fungible tokens or in regards to DeFi, in regards to Ordinals and everything else that is going to be very popular and growing in the Bitcoin ecosystem in the next few years. So that's one. And second, we are actually, this is something that we actually discussed together. I don't know if you remember, Francis, but we're in Denver having a lunch with Jeremy and others, and we're discussing like, hey, what can we do, to basically show support, but also like allow our users to like show support for these things. And so we're actually working on like a mini project. We don't have announcement ready, so we can just share kind of a little bit of alpha, but the full announcement is going to come hopefully maybe in 1 or 2 weeks from now, that we actually want to build like a simple app where we let people vote for these things, So basically you connect with your Xverse and, you are voting with your Bitcoin, you're voting with your Bitcoin assets on, okay, which soft fork do you think, would be better or that you would like to see, right? And so this way, again, like we're listening to the users, we're not really gatekeeping anything. We're just saying like, hey, we're giving you the option to express your opinion, because I think until today, it has not been really possible. It's just kind of on Twitter, people can tweet, but they have not had a chance to vote with their Bitcoin, like what they would like to see in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And so that's something that we're going to do. And again, it's a small step, right? I'm not saying that this is going to be something that is going to change the world of how people think of soft forks or about soft forks, but we just want to find ways how we can get our users involved in that conversation.
I think you're muted.
Sorry, that's amazing. Sorry about the mute. I do remember the conversation, but I wasn't actually expecting you guys to ship that so fast. So that's really cool. Recently, there's been a conversation. There's 5 people who were able to make, there's 5 people who were able to propose changes to the current Bitcoin package that people run, right? And one of those people said, hey, we should be asking users what they want, right? And realistically, there's, probably 150 million plus Bitcoin users, and it's pretty hard to ask each one of them what to use or what we should be doing. So it really makes sense to try and ask sort of like the intermediate layers, right? And have them sort of funnel things in to other key decision makers, because we have key stakeholders, and then we have key stakeholders who, like Xverse, represent a much larger group and a wide circle of people. And I really, I understood what she was saying, but I really, really liked something that this guy named Brian Trolls, who likes to make fun of the runes community, but is a really smart guy. And he said, you should be asking app developers, right? And I agree with that, but I actually think that you guys have sort of determined the best of both worlds, right? So you are empowering your users to speak through you, right? And I think that that's very admirable. So thank you guys for doing that. And yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, in terms of what's next for you guys, like what on the horizon outside of soft forks do you guys think is sort of like the most exciting thing? Too
So
broad?
I think yeah, it's a little bit broad, but onboarding is another thing that we're spending a lot of resources on. If you have Starknet as a layer 2, you have all these applications you can use, fast transaction speed. The next barrier is going to be, how do you get new people into the ecosystem easily, right? And we want to onboard mainstream users, which are not like, seasoned crypto enthusiasts that know everything about, seed phrases and how to like properly store your crypto and everything. So a lot of our effort has been put into things like MPC, seedless onboarding, basically making that experience easier so that people don't really have to be technical in order to onboard into the ecosystem.
Yeah. And my end, what I can add, like, what are the things that I'm super excited about? Like, at the end of the day, we are building like all-in-one Bitcoin platform. So we're empowering a lot of developers to build apps on Bitcoin in an easier way, So that's something that we're doing. And I think I'm super excited about that, because at the end of the day, we need more developers to build better applications and better use cases, or more use cases, so that then people actually have something to do with their Bitcoin, right? I think we already have a bunch of use cases. We have fungible tokens, we have ordinals, we have some L1 DeFi protocols, we have obviously a lot of L2s and stuff like that, but we need more of that. Like, we need more things like, things that people talk about quite a bit, and I see a lot of activity in, is like, I have Bitcoin, I don't want to sell it, I want to borrow against it, right? And so we need to bring these kinds of applications to mainstream and to more users. And so again, like, allowing more builders to build on Bitcoin with the Xverse tooling, and obviously with the distribution that we provide, I think that's something that we're doing, we're investing heavily into. And then kind of like helping people to explore the ecosystem, right? So we're investing heavily into building these kinds of, we call it Bitcoin Hub, where you not only have your personalized portfolio when you connect your wallet and you see all of the transactions, all of the assets, and how the price is moving up and down and stuff like that, but you also can within one click you can explore the entire Bitcoin ecosystem of DeFi apps and marketplaces and tools and L2s, and you can just, like, with 1 or 2 clicks you can start using them. And so that's another thing that we're doing, because again, like, Bitcoin ecosystem is still at the very beginning. Many things are kind of scattered, that like a lot of people are doing different things, but there is really no one place to explore everything. And we're in the best position to do that, right? Because people download Xverse to use all of these apps. And so we want to make sure that they can easily explore them and find them. And so that's another thing that, again, it's maybe not something sophisticated in terms of technology, but I think from a user standpoint, it's extremely important, and we can contribute heavily to the growth of the ecosystem. So that's a couple things that I wanted to add from my end.
Yeah, it's the center of the ecosystem, right? Like a wallet
100%.
is a wallet's the beginning and end of every conversation, especially if you do it right. So that's great. Yeah, in terms of things that you think users like will be most excited about using on Starknet, do you think AMM is just like the most logical one?
I think so. I think we have seen that people really like that experience. There are people that are building these kinds of AMMs on other chains right now. And some of them have been widely popular, even though, again, like the meme coin trend is maybe not the hottest right now, but still you can see hundreds of Bitcoins worth of volume on these platforms. And so people definitely do want better trading experience. And I think, these things should exist on Starknet, and so if we can build some really, really cool user experience, then I think people will definitely like these things. And then I think Bitcoin DeFi, right? Like I think Bitcoin DeFi is really interesting. That includes like what can you do with your assets? Like let's say you bridge them into Starknet. Like what else can you do? Like can you earn some yield? Obviously, can you maybe, well, it's maybe not DeFi, but like make some super fast payments, and stuff like that. Like these things that people actually do want to do anyways, and they're already doing them. It's just like we need to provide better user experience.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue into sort of my next set of questions. It's like, look, we know that we don't have the perfect version of Bitcoin on layer 2 today. It's not going to be perfect, right? But I think a lot of people have allowed over the last couple of years, like perfect to be the enemy of good enough, right? The goal of Bitcoin is not to be perfect. The goal of Bitcoin is to be as useful to as many people as possible, right? And the most useful that we can be right now is a variety of different wrappers or different trust assumptions. And none of them are the same, and they all carry different risks. So I just wanted to outline a couple of them because this is one of our core theses at StarkWare. But when you bridge over from Xverse, right, to Starknet, you'll be able to go through an atomic swap bridge. Now, the atomic swap between BTC and something like WBTC itself is trustless. But once you actually hit the WBTC and you own WBTC, now you own BTC, but you own BTC custodied at somewhere like BitGo, right? So you own a receipt to BitGo. Another example of that is it could be somewhere like Thesis, right, where it has a forward security, different version of a multisig. But now your Bitcoin has maybe it's got a little bit more complex protocol risk to it because of a little bit more of a unique setup and a little bit less credit risk because there's no one necessarily backing it quite like BitGo. So you have a bit of a threshold there. And then you have like really new and innovative things like BitVM, right, which allow you to essentially do a roll up on Bitcoin optimistically with a federation. And the requirement is that one person, it only has to be one person, is honest. And as long as one person is honest in participating, your money won't be stolen. So that also introduces additional risk. There's less trust assumptions in terms of an individual party, but now there's protocol risk, right? Like we have a complicated proof that we're verifying on Starknet or on Bitcoin, and things could potentially go wrong there. Additionally, adding even more here, you have things like staked Bitcoin, and it's staked in the Babylon protocol, which means it has a potential for like a slashing event. And then since it's staked at Babylon, and people want to trade it on DeFi, it's staked and then it's wrapped, right? So you have your protocol risk of staking it, and then you have your your custodial risk of the person that holds the keys for it. So all of these different BTCs all hold their own types of sort of risk spectrum when you bridge them over from Xverse. And one way that you can essentially accrue yield is by providing liquidity for coins which you think have really, really strong solvency guarantees, right? So if you think that BitVM is you feel very, very strongly about it, and you also feel very strongly about the solvency of something like TBTC, maybe you want to provide liquidity for each one of those, right? So you're sort of delta neutral on Bitcoin, and you're just trying to accrue and gain and generate as much additional BTC as possible. However, what if you have a different perspective? What if your perspective is that one of these versions of wrapped Bitcoin is actually insolvent, right? We've seen similar scenarios. The staked ETH situation was one version where you sort of had a run on staked ETH. Despite the fact that all the ETH was there, right? You had a liquidity preference of like, we want our BTC now. And something like a BitVM, if there's a challenge, could run into a little bit of a liquidity crunch, right? And then we've also seen some hacks of major exchanges, right? And BTC could be custodied at those major exchanges. And in that situation, people are going to want to sell to what they believe is a safer version of BTC, right? So you may want to come to Starknet in order to take a position on the solvency of an individual BTC. For me, what really enshrined this as being an important market was I used to work in lending, and at a point in time in lending, a lot of the ecosystem had been debanked from Silvergate. They'd been debanked from Metropolitan Bank, and then they were debanked from Silicon Valley Bank. So the only real thing that anyone could do is take their US dollars, and they put them on they put them in USDC, or they put them in USDT. And for that period of time, and I think for the first time in crypto, the most important pair in crypto was fully on chain, right? It was essentially receipts with different credit risk, but it was fully on chain. It was curve pool. I remember, again, being a lender at the time, I was just staring at that thing for hours and hours and hours. And for a moment in time, it was the most important thing in the world, or at least the most important thing in crypto. So we'd really like to recreate that. So we want people to keep that in mind when they bridge their Bitcoin over to Starknet, right? We want you to remember, hey, there is solvency risk, and it's different, and credit risk for each one of these. And I think when you bridge over, you should have a good idea of like, where is there solvency risk? Is it credit risk? Is it protocol risk? Like, how do I want to deal with it? What's my position on it? And we also really, really, really want Starknet to be the place where people come and take positions, and they take and they sort of say, hey, this is what I believe. I believe that this is very, very solvent, and I'm going to back that claim, right? Or I believe this is very insolvent, because ultimately sunlight is the best disinfectant. And if things are insolvent, we want that to be exposed. So we want Starknet to be the market where sort of some of that stuff happens. So sorry a little bit if that's a little bit of a sermon to cap this thing off with. But I feel really passionately about sort of both of these two markets that we're hoping to spin up on Starknet. One is sort of your Bitcoin assets for the first time, bringing in these like tremendous users who are committed, have a strong community, and could potentially grow into just a massive ecosystem, right? If you compare the Bitcoin asset class ecosystem of about I don't know, sub-billion, right? Not if you include Ordinals, it's more, to the Ethereum one, which is 300 billion or something like that. There's obviously, with general computation coming to Bitcoin, a lot of room for that to sort of catch up, and that come closer to parity. And then on the second side, we believe that the solvency market of different stable BTCs is a really, really important and extremely serious market, which is serious and most important now. So we're really excited to be partnering with that, and we just want to always practice the utmost transparency with all of Xverse's customers and our own customers, and making sure that they understand the risks of bridging their BTC to Starknet. And we also want Starknet to be the place that before they bridge anything, they take a look and they say, hey, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of sell side pressure on this specific version of this specific type of wrapped BTC, and maybe I want to stay away from that. So it can also be there can be information in the market, and we believe that these are really, really smart users, and we think that you guys can actually take a look at that and understand the value. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have any closing notes. It doesn't appear. Let me just check the questions one more time. Yeah, we don't have too many questions, it looks like. But yeah, I don't know if there's any closing notes you guys wanted to end.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm just excited. I think I can just say closing notes. I'm just excited for the future of the Bitcoin ecosystem. Because we're still at the very beginning. We have spent past 2 years, maybe a little bit more than past 2 years, working on this Bitcoin renaissance and season 2. And I think we have proven everybody already, all the doubters, that this stuff is not going to go away. It's only going to get bigger. If you asked me like 18 months ago at the very beginning of Ordinals, like I couldn't tell you, right? Like I would be like, yeah, this is still so new that I don't know where this thing is going to be in the next 2 to 3 years. But now I can tell you with absolute certainty, this ecosystem has established itself among the top 3 Obviously Bitcoin has always been number one, but if you look at NFTs, if you look at the activity on chain, on these chains like Ethereum, Solana, Bitcoin is on top. Obviously we still have a lot of catching up to do to Ethereum and the DeFi ecosystem and the NFT ecosystem there. But when it comes to Solana, if you look at like the volume, the trading volume of NFTs, for instance, Bitcoin is actually on par or maybe even higher than Solana, which was basically looked at as like the next big thing in this cycle, right? And so I think it's undeniable that what we have started here is not going to go away. It's only going to get bigger as we improve the technology, as we potentially see the soft fork, as we add more of these L2s that actually bring actual utility and great use cases for people. Then I'm very confident that we're going to 100x plus from here when it comes to the Bitcoin ecosystem, the activity, the amount of builders, and everything that's happening here. And so I'm just super excited to be here to build with you guys. And let's see where we're going to be in next 12 to 24 months. I think it's going to be a very exciting journey. You're muted, Francis, again.
All right. Yeah, sorry. Ken, any closing notes?
No, just super excited as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much for joining. I enjoyed the
Thank you guys.
And I look forward to the partnership.
Amazing.
Right.
Thank you, Francis.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.